Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. The Canadian government is registering podcast channels. This is being done by the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunication Commission to ostensibly modernize the country's broadcasting framework, or so we are told. Because within the first paragraph or so, the political game is given away. That this regulatory plan is to ensure that online streaming services are making what they say, quote, meaningful contributions to Canadian and Indigenous content, end quote. Now, what in the world does that mean? Parroting the false official line in the mass graves hoax, for example? The registration for platforms earning $10 million or more must be completed by the end of this November. As journalist Glenn Greenwald said in response to this news, this is being done by a government that is one of the world's most repressive online censorship regimes. And while our ability in North America to publicly say what we see with our very own eyes happening all around us is being limited and then to be quashed altogether, we're turning into a third world hellhole in other ways too. So down in Eagle Pass, Texas, where the border crisis is exploding, video is emerging of United Nations vans from the International Organization for Migration driving down the street. Now, I know UN agents are in Mexico giving money and other freebies to illegal aliens to help them break U.S. federal immigration law, which is bad enough. But this seems to be a whole new level. The instability is all around us. Just yesterday evening, a Democrat Congressman, Henry Cuellar from Texas, was carjacked in southeast D.C.'s Navy Yard neighborhood by armed criminals. His car, his phone, and iPad were all stolen by at least 3 armed assailants. And while thankfully he's okay, his stolen goods were also recovered. But man, remember what we were just talking about last night with that hardcore lefty journalist out in Philadelphia who constantly mocked and belittled anyone for saying that crime was exploding under their Soros-backed DA. And then he was shot to death inside his own home. Or that BLM supporting tech CEO in Baltimore who was raped and killed by exactly the kind of violent suspect who BLM advocates to have let out early. It's honestly getting so bad that the once removed liberals are now not so removed from the effects of their own policies. So if there was ever a time for the GOP to capitalize on current events and to offer the country a new and better path forward, this would be it. Joining us now to discuss what he writes about in this recent op-ed for Deseret News is Josh Hammer, the senior editor-at-large for Newsweek. Josh, thanks for being here tonight.
Kara, always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. So before we can even talk about what that path forward might look like given current events, what are the current predominant factions on the right and how are they butting heads and vying for power?
Well, it's confusing, Kara. It's confusing for multiple reasons. But one, I mean, the top reason why I kind of hesitate to even answer that question is because you have ideological factions. You have people who disagree about political economy. You have people who disagree about national sovereignty, about foreign policy, about conservative political theory, about the things, frankly, that motivate me day in and day out. And then you have some folks who seem to disagree over one individual and one individual only, and that, of course, being the former president, Donald Trump. And there are I think, lines to divide Republicans or conservatives currently along both of those separate axes. But I'll stick with the former because that's, frankly, the one that's more interesting to me. So for the former, I think you kind of have what I refer to in that piece as the old guard and the new right. The old guard would refer to kind of the pre-2016 status quo ante, those who are basically kind of coming up on 1980s era outmoded pieties referring to kind of globalism and neoliberalism and hailing kind of the sanctity of open borders and open labor markets and free movement of capital, labor, and goods and all of that here. And then you have kind of the rise of this more kind of nationalist, populist, kind of empirical, grassroots, communitarian sentiment, which has really been on the up and up ever since 2016 or 2017 or so, which is looking at a lot of these issues where the libertarian-inspired conservative establishment, Conservatism Inc., has really sold out conservative voters for years and years, and many of us are just throwing up our hands and saying enough is enough. So that is basically the divide as far as I see it, and many of us are starting to kind of think about what this looks like moving forward now.
Sometimes you hear the terms zombie Reaganism or zombie constitutionalism kind of thrown around to discuss exactly what we were talking about a moment ago about a Republican or conservative movement that's stuck using an old type framework, looking at old problems and not understanding what the left is now, where it is now. Oftentimes you'll hear these types of Republicans say, wait, the left can't do that because the Constitution says, and if I had, a penny for every time I heard that, I'd be a millionaire at this point because so many people, it seems to be, are so confused saying, well, how can the left get away with X, Y, or Z when the Constitution clearly says they can't?